Black thing tank, Black thing tank with Anthony and Patrice. Black thing tank. Like, what is the Black thing tank? Like, we really just wanted to like create a space where we could, you know, discuss Black content with Black content creators and providers and consumers of Black content. I mean, but make no mistake, like we also want to create our own content and pretty much star and produce our own content, and then, you know, move on to music where we'll write our own songs and we'll sing our own songs and, you know, produce our own songs and totally go into film where we'll definitely write our own films and, you know, produce our own films and own our own films and, you know, star on our films and, you know, because it's about Black content. That's what we want, Blackness.
Welcome to Black Think Tank! I know it was the blood. I know it was the blood. I know it was the blood for me. Oh, one day when I was lost, Jesus died upon the cross, and I know it was the blood for me. Hey, Shondo, welcome to Black Think. Today we are talking about Black religion, Black people and religion, and Black Think Tank with Anthony and Patrice and the squad. Welcome. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Good deal. Good deal. Good deal. Patrice, you want to introduce our squad right quick?
Of course, as always, the Black Think Tank squad, we have the Turnipseeds, Tracie and Haywood Turnipseed, and you'll probably see a couple little babies that make a cameo if we lucky.
Dressed up today. She's gonna try and get in there. She dressed up.
Welcome to the squad. Always great to see you. Love to see Black love every week.
Hey.
How y'all doing?
We're doing great. How y'all?
We're doing great.
Doing good.
Good. We're good.
We got a little lag on our internet. I'm not sure what's happening there, but we'll get that right. We got the Teddy Riley Wi-Fi happening.
Well,
we're gonna pray to Black Jesus and pray. He extends his ever melanated arm over your internet right now. Right now, we have an amazing special guest with us. I'm so excited to have this amazing Black man on the show. He is an associate professor of religion and culture at the School of Divinity at Wake Forest University. Give it up for Dr. Hill! And you're so much more than that. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Hicks.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much, Brother Anthony, for having me on. I'm so glad Mia made this connection, who was one of my standout former students.
Shout out to Pastor Mia. Pastor Mia Sloan.
Gotta shout her out. Shout her and her wonderful husband out.
Yes.
I'm on faculty here at Wake Forest. I'm born and raised from Los Angeles, California, and went to graduate school in Houston, Texas. Spent a lot of time there. I was really blessed by Brother George Floyd's homegoing today, because a lot of the people who were on that stage were people that I worked with in Houston. So it was a wonderful time there, and I've been here at Wake Forest in the School of Divinity since 2011.
Okay, good deal. You're making strides over at Wake Forest too. You just got. You want to tell us some good news, or you want to keep it on the hush?
Sure. Well, apparently it's becoming official. I'll be the founding director of a new center here at the university called the Center for Research, Engagement, and Collaboration in African American Life. So thank you. We will be foregrounding Black life and all of its myriad of beautiful facets, and we will also be engaging in research, innovative research, and community-facing work that relates to the struggles of being encased in Black flesh. So we'll be doing a lot of that work, and I'm excited to do it at Wake Forest. I'm excited to do it in partnership with brothers like Corey Walker, who will also be leading our new African American Studies program. So exciting times here at Wake Forest.
Just to be clear, this is the first program of its kind in the 86-year history of Wake Forest.
This will be one of the first times that Wake Forest is engaging. We've had American Ethnic Studies for several years, but we've never had a program that may ultimately become a department in African American Studies. And we haven't had a center of this kind that places as its very emphasis Black experiences broadly construed. So we are very excited about this time. But
yes.
it's time for the work to be done. It's been time for this work to be done. And there have been some trailblazers on this campus who've done some wonderful work. But I am really looking forward to taking.
Shout out to Dr. Barbie Oaks.
Dr. Barbie Oaks, dear colleague Melissa Harris Perry, and so many others. Herman Urey, who was the first African American professor on this campus I believe he was the first to earn tenure on this campus. So there's so many names, so many folks who have done stellar work, who have allowed this possibility to happen in this season, and I'm looking forward to doing my part.
Now, you know what our topic is today,
Yes,
Black
sir.
religion in America. But before we get into that, and before we do our honoring, Tracie, Haywood, what's going on? How are y'all doing?
Hey, we're doing all right. We're down here in Southeast DC.
Yes.
Not too far from Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Yo, we tried to go down there yesterday, and it was so blocked off. You can't even drive towards it.
Yeah. It's you can see it from space though, and it's still people are still out there. It's gone.
Can you Google Earth it?
Yeah, you can Google Earth it. It's gone from Protestville to like actually become some folks out there. Of course, you get the t-shirt sellers and your wares and wares and whatnot. People selling things. But people are talking, conversing, and conversations have started, which are the most important things. Shouts out to Dr. Hicks. That's really good stuff there, sir. You're out there doing the Lord's work, like literally.
Yeah.
Hey. So, as Patrice, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, as always, this is a donation-based show. So, if it is pressed upon your heart and your wallet, please, by all means, send us a Cash App so that we can split whatever we receive equally through the cast and the crew of the show today. And Anthony has the information, as far as where you can send it to.
Yes.
There we go. Cash
I'm also
App.
going to post it to the. Let's see. Give me 1 second.
We'll probably pin it in the comments or something like that.
So let's
pass the collection plate.
Yeah, we're just passing the collection plate, and we got word from Dr. Hicks that this is actually what the Lord wants you to do with your tithes and offerings. This is
instead of
we do like the money that jangles, but we do prefer the kind that
Okay, there we go. So we're all set up.
I've been a judge.
So we always honor our ascended angels who have passed on. Normally we do people in the industry like Little Richard, Janae Dubois, Andre Harrell, and then we started with all that's going on out here. We started reading the names of those who have ascended, those Black lives who have ascended due to police brutality. I think that a facet that often gets forgotten or overlooked is the trans community. So we want to honor these ascended angels by reading their names and speaking their names. And we ask you in solidarity to also raise your hands as we speak these names, and speak the names with us if you can. Dustin Parker, we speak your name. Nuisa Luciano Ruiz, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Yampi Arocho, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Monica Diamond, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Lexi, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Joanna Metzger, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Serena Ramos, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Layla Sanchez, we speak your name. Penelope Ramirez, we speak your name. Nina Pop, we speak your name. Helly O'Regan, we speak your name. Tony McDade, we speak your name.
Speak your
And
name.
all of these, we speak your name.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Yo, that was too many names, yo. For
Too
real.
many names, man. Too many names.
And
Crazy
it's not
out here.
all of them. And
That's
it's
not
not
even
all
all
of
of
them.
them.
That's the worst part of
We
this.
can't do it in an hour. We can't,
None of
it's
that's
too many names. And that was only one facet of Black Lives, but Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter. We love this blackness. Melanin is just so intoxicating to me, so intellectualizing to me. Like I just can't get enough of it. So, also, before we thank you guys for tuning in. Yo, I appreciate everybody that's watching. Make sure that if you have a question about Black religion or Black people in religion, the Black church, make sure that you ask it in the comment section so that we can address it. Also, share the live feed. We know that this is a topic. A lot of people ask me about this topic, because we're doing a lot of Black content, and this is one of the things that came up. So be sure that, what up, Leon Scott? Be sure to, what up, Miko? Miko is an old faithful. I appreciate you guys tuning in.
Anita Wade, thank you for checking in.
Hey, Anita. Anita. So we here at Black Think Tank, we know that it's just so much going on with like Blackness, police brutality, quarantining, COVID, things of that nature. And it's difficult to find some humor, bring levity to the situation. So we decided that we're going to put on a comedy show full of Black comics with Black content, talking about the Black experience in a way that's going to provide levity to you, our viewers. So go check that out. It's gonna be myself, Patrice, Haywood, of course. We have Jamone Darnell, we have Liz Barlow, and we have one more person. It is Brittany Carney. Brittany Carney.
It's a free show. It's a free show.
It's a free show. So,
we'll be taking donations. We will be collecting.
Well, with the collection plate will, be passed.
Yes, the doors to the church are open,
but it is a free show. So make sure you guys come out virtually. Get those tickets on Eventbrite, Black Think Tank Comedy Revolution. And it's on the Facebook group too. So make sure you click yes.
Now, are there a limited amount of tickets with it being on Zoom? Is there a limited amount of spots or?
Well, yeah, because we want it to be comfortable. So we're, so people go ahead and get them so we can reserve your spot and, have this platform. Now, shout out to the Flunky. Hey. Our sponsor, the Flunky. The Flunky, if you don't have time to do it, the Flunky can do it. Check out theflunky.com or the Flunky on all social media platforms, concierge service. Also, MJ's Infusions, Herbal Infusions. Make sure you go check out MJ's Herbal Infusions on all social media platforms. And then you'll see the greatness behind the melanin. I really feel like that was a commercial spot. Like, so really, Black people, are y'all ready to even have this conversation? Like,
yeah.
It's about to get real, and we're definitely not going to have enough time to cover it all. But I'm very interested in finding out, especially within the chat with our viewership, how you all are coping, because I do realize in this particular time and climate, a lot of people are starting to question, is it the rapture? Did we miss it? Are we left behind? Is Jesus coming at all? Like, there are so, like, I've seen a lot of people unraveling religiously in a way, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, but I do think that it's something that, you know, people should have an outlet to talk about. Is, you know, it makes sense to have a lot of questions right now. So past, present, and future.
I agree. I totally agree. I've been tuned in to a lot of spiritual or religious things going on, especially like on social media. My cousin, Pastor Mia, she actually was on a panel with other pastors in the area, Winston-Salem, I think, and they were talking on how to connect with the millennials in church, like, you know, religion and millennials. They're having a hard time connecting. Now, you know, well, back in the day, it was basically you do what you're told and this is the way, and there's no question about it. You're just like, you know, you're not questioning, oh, how did Noah fit all the animals on the ark? How did kangaroos get on there? Were they in Australia?
Oh, you
like,
just start questioning.
you know, like people,
because
like,
they're having a hard time connecting. I've been to a couple praise and worships, and they have parodied Cardi B into praise them till I get some money. Like, I know that they're finding ways to connect.
Party. So
praise parodies that are questionable, but they were definitely trying to reach a certain demographic.
And I think that's a way, you know, I remember, well, I think that in the days of social media and Google and things of that nature, I think that it's harder for people to pass on things that can't be researched. You know, people have access to things. They're not just saying, hey, this is the way and this is the way you're gonna go, like our parents. You know, they're people, you know, they have questions. They're questioning everything. How, you know, just some of the questions that I've seen, how do we, and, you know, Dr. Hicks, you can chime in at any moment. How do, what was our original religion? What did we worship before we came over here? When we came over here, we were slaves. This religion was a new thing for us. We weren't Christian. Yeah,
Sorry,
when we were
that just
enslaved.
grabbed my ear. They were enslaved.
I know, when we were enslaved.
We were enslaved. We were enslaved.
Hey!
Came here.
Hey!
Hello.
He
They
caught
got astronomers and doctors.
Translate.
They
Yes,
translate.
translate my tongues. I was actually speaking in tongues and you translated it for me. So, you know, just questions. Is Jesus black? I mean, just rudimentary questions that Black people ask. You know? I mean, like, really.
Black on Cartoon Network.
Basic question.
Hey.
Black
Easy basic question.
Over there where he from. If he was black, he definitely had a tan.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Hicks, where do you find yourself dealing with being a professor of religion and culture? Where's this? Where do we start to get all this?
Okay, so we only have a limited amount of time. I'm about to pack a whole lot in this.
Take it slow.
I wrote a whole book about why it was that so many African and African Americans would have converted to Christianity, especially during the period of enslavement, given that it was often used tactically to maintain enslavement, right? So what was it about that particular religion that would have been appealing to them? So I'm gonna get to that, but I wanna start with your question about formerly enslaved people coming to this country as early as 1619, and what they brought with them in terms of their religious practices and how they would transition into the religion, as it were, of the slave master. Let me begin with the words of Frederick Douglass, and I think he sets a nice narrative for our time together. Frederick Douglass in the 1800s said this, almost was risky to say it, of course. He said, quote, "Between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. so wide that to receive one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. They, talking about slave-holding Christians, they attend with Pharisaical strictness to the outward forms of religion, and at the same time neglect weightier matters of law, judgment, mercy, and faith, end quote. This was Frederick Douglass making an indictment on a nation that was beginning to tout itself as a Christian nation. So how is it that Black folk would have chosen in any substantive way to accept this particular religion was my question.
Yeah.
And for me, that required an interrogation of what Black religion is and has always been. Number one, for me, Black religion has been what many scholars, I'll start with Gerard Wilmore, who said that Christianity for Black people was something more or less Christian, which means that for Black folk in this country, Christianity could not, how it looked, how it manifested within the community, how it was articulated, how it was expressed, could not be the same as the Christianity of the slave master, right? So in a very real way, absent empirical evidence that God actually loved Black flesh, Black people drew upon this faith, and by way of their own ingenious improvisation, created for themselves a Christianity that could work. So what did that look like? Well, it grafted in, to Brother Anthony's question, some forms of African traditional religions, Yoruba-based religions. Folks were brought from West African shores, from as far up as Senegambia, down a 3,000 plus mile coastline, in and through current day Benin and Togo, and of course, Nigeria, Northern Angola, and the like. And so what folks brought with them were traditional religions of their communities out of which they came, of their countries out of which they came. They were worshipers of Olodumare, the supreme God. They were adherents to Orisha-based religions, where they not only acknowledged the Orishas, but the spirit world, and they venerated the ancestors, the Ngungun. So what they brought with them tactically and spiritually were a spirit that was infused within their DNA, a spirit that they communed around and lived experientially on a daily basis. Those early transports, we'll call them transports for now, who were stolen from their lands. But once here, what they saw was what they quickly realized was that their social status in this world, in this new country, in this strange land, was something different. They were treated more or less human. And so we can't think about Black religion within the context of the United States without thinking about the 1857 Dred Scott versus Sanford case, which established that Dred Scott, who was trying to sue the country, brought his case to the Supreme Court to sue for his freedom. And he had a legitimate case to do so based upon previous case law. And so he brought this case, it arose all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice in the holding, which was against Dred Scott, the court found that he was not even entitled to sue on the grounds that he was not a citizen, nor was he ever intended to be one. In fact, in that holding, Chief Justice Taney would find that the authors of the Constitution had viewed all Blacks as inferior beings, or in beings, as he's put it, of an inferior order, so altogether inferior and unfit to associate with the Black race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights that a white man was obliged to even respect. These were the actual words in that holding. So 1857 sets the tone for what Black people were facing in this country, whether they were enslaved or free.
Right.
And so what you then have developed is through, I'm giving a very brief constitutional history of discrimination in this country.
Yeah, make us understand. Make us understand. We need backstory.
What you end up with contextually is a fight over, in part, over the freedom or the status of enslavement for Black people between the North and the South that we understand as the Civil War, and the post-Civil War amendments of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, but did something else as it relates to mass incarceration. The 14th Amendment, which allowed citizenship in 1868 for those who had been defined as enslaved, and the 15th Amendment in 1870, which gives Black men, at the very least, the right to vote. So here you have a platform of freedom and justice and citizenship granted to formerly enslaved people. And so when I tell my class, when we get to this point in the class, I tell them that we should be done with this class right now, right? Except for the fact that by 1883, you had civil rights, you had Supreme Court cases that all but abolished the rights that had been gained. There was an initial Civil Rights Act of 1875 that those court cases kind of stamped out and rendered almost moot. And by 1896, we get Plessy versus Ferguson, which stamps into law separate but equal, which gives rise to the maltreatment of Black bodies that would happen all through Jim Crow into the Civil Rights era. So I'll stop right there to say this. Black religion has always had to respond to that reality for Black people in this country. And so when I think about African-American religious experience or the Black faith tradition in its myriad of forms in this country, I don't think about dogma and rules and what is happening in churches in terms of sinning and what you should and should not do. The way I think about it is the way scholars like Charles Long and Anthony Penn, who trained me at Rice University, I think of it in terms of orientation, how Black folks oriented themselves in a world that saw their flesh as less than. So how they oriented themselves in this world where they on a daily basis faced the absurd. So when we think about Black religion, we think about it in terms of orientation, experience, as opposed to rules and dogmas, meaning making, and perpetual striving, as Anthony Penn puts it, towards something great and greater than themselves. So ultimately, it's a quest for reclamation, to articulate the value of their bodies in the fullest sense. It is a quest, as Anthony Penn puts it, toward a complex subjectivity, an articulation of the complex nature of my body, warts and all, as a fully human body that is worthy of God's love. So when I think about Black religion, I have to start there, that what this is a quest for full humanity, not so much a quest for articulating rules and dogma.
Okay, Patrice, what were you gonna say?
Dr. Hicks, so would you say that Black religion in part has been, at least in this country, a survival tactic? Like it was a form of survival?
In part, but only in part. I'm very slow to embrace that fully, only from this standpoint, that when if we think about Black religion solely in terms of survival, we limit its impact and what it was and has been able to do within the context of Black suffering in this country. So there is this issue of theodicy, not theology, but this term theodicy, which is a term that we understand in theological circles as the wrestling with the reality that there is a God who is omniscient, right? All knowing, omnipotent, all powerful, and ultimately benevolent, all loving, that exists in a world while at the same time, simultaneously, there exists all this suffering in the world. And so the question becomes, is this God who God says this God is, right? Can this God stamp out all the suffering that has been endured by Black people all these years. If in fact this is the case, if in fact we believe that this God can do that, then do we then call into question whether this God is in fact all-knowing, ultimately loving, and all-powerful, or as some scholars like Penn and others, William Jones, have pointed out, or do we account for this God's actions as maybe being against Black people? Maybe God takes sides. Maybe God has genocidal tendencies, as my advisor once articulated, toward Black people, right? So when we think about religion and the God that we are trying to connect with, especially within the context of Christianity, there are some unreconciled questions that come into play. And so, yes, religion in part becomes a tactic to get through the by and by. But I think if we stop it there, we limit the impact and import that religion has had for Black people. So I don't think of it solely as reactive, right? But that there is a proactive element that has a healing component that Black people have been engaged in through their faith practices on a daily basis. So when I think about micro issues that Black folk on plantations or even post-slavery were dealing with. So for example, a Black enslaved person may have destroyed a tool that they needed to plow the land of their master out of rebellion for maltreatment, right? There are accounts in enslaved narratives of people who are articulating their freedom based upon their belief that God did not want them, did not require them, did not believe that they should be enslaved. And so for me, this becomes a mode of understanding, not just as a reactionary tactic, but as a tactic to articulate one's humanity in the fullest sense. And we get examples of this through what scholars like Albert Rabateau call slave religion, or the invisible institution on plantations, where enslaved people were worshiping under the watchful eye of the master during the day at some of the plantation churches, but down by the riverside in the evening, finding their way to their own worship experiences, where their own Black flesh could be articulated as beautiful and fully human. I mean, this is what is done so brilliantly by Toni Morrison in the Pulitzer Prize winning book, Beloved, when she, through the sermon of Baby Suggs Holy, says, you know, here in this place we flesh that weeps and laughs and dances barefoot in the grass. Love your flesh, because yonder they don't love it. Yonder they don't love your hands. Yonder they only tie, bind, chop off your hands and leave them empty. Love your hands, raise them up, kiss them. And she goes through all of these parts of the body that she is articulating Black people to love. So I think when I think about Black religion, it is a proactive, ever evolving move toward an articulation of this flesh as ultimately God loved, God breathed, God created beauty.
So let's talk about this, the evolution that you speak, the evolution that we're talking about of Black religion from when, from the spirituality that you were speaking of, which we came here with. Now, the things that we came here with, you know, I tend to say that those things are looked upon now as some type of like voodoo or like hoodoo or witchcraft or, you know, things of that nature. For example, as you see, Patrice is burning her things that she's
burning. You said burning her things. It's Palo Santo.
Okay.
And I have my earrings in.
I saw a discussion the other day. Somebody was talking about burning sage, and somebody was like, "Oh, that's of the devil." And then it was like, you know, I mean, but that those things that were done, or those spiritual tools that we had when we came over here, now they're looked upon as these things that are of a negative connotation. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. So when one of the first things I teach my students about with African traditional religions is we debunk the misconceptions right up front and errors in terminology. So you get terminology as it relates to African traditional religions as being primitive or lacking in form and structure, and savage and native and solely tribal and paganism and heathenism and all of these things. When in fact, what you have in the liturgical and cosmological form of African traditional religions, in a myriad of forms, it is a monotheistic religious formulation, where Olodumare is a supreme God. These religions are strong in oral tradition, whether it be Olodumare or Chakwa. Individuals are relating themselves to the attributes of a supreme being that is either father or friend or creator or ruler or directly approachable.
Lover.
Exactly, lover. The Orishas are there as prominent, depending on the region that you lived in. A pantheon in formation, not created. They were derived of the deity. They were localized. And so when you think about the structure and order of the myriad forms of African traditional religions, or even how those forms become kind of blended together with other forms of religious expression, either it be in the form of candomblé or Santeria or voodoo, what you end up with are forms of religious expression that are consistent with the nature of what it means to be encased in Black flesh, pulling back or drawing on the traditional religious experiences that would have been brought over in the hulls of ships, a kind of Sankofa, right? A drawing back, a pulling forth, a moment of understanding and reckoning with where we've been. Now, it must be stated that cultural memory is fragile. So what was brought over in 1792 may not be the same thing that is adhered to post 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade in this country was abolished. But the slave trade, of course, was not abolished domestically. So what you end up with are forms of religious expression that get grafted into Christianity within the context of the United, or what was becoming the United States. And so you have, for example, the ring shout grafted into the expressions of and experiences of African-American religious experience in this context, where the ring shout becomes this kind of ode to connection with African traditional religions, which come in the form of a fusion of counterclockwise dance-like movement that includes call and response and singing and percussion and hand clapping and stick beating rhythmically that are West African in origin, affirming the oneness of the spirit and the ancestors, affirming the community and its cohesiveness, affirming what the community needs to do to affirm Black life. So you always, and this is what historian Gayward Wilmore was getting at, you always get a coming together of both the traditional African nature of Black religious expression, even in this country. Charles Long says that the shadow of Africa is ever present in Black religious life, but you also get it in conversation with the function of Christianity in this country.
Look, I just want y'all to make sure y'all see the difference between a preacher and a teacher, because I'm over. Listen, they're not one and the same.
Let me tell you, I was sitting over there. I wanted to raise my hand. I was like,
Let the people say, amen.
I know.
Going on and not enough teaching. That's my issue. It's too much preaching and not enough teaching. Yes, Dr. Hicks.
Well, we need both. We need both. You know, what I see my work is doing is feeding churches, the mass population who want to know about the nature of African-American religious life, I'm offering them opportunities to engage in learning and dialogue and research around these issues so that they might be more informed when they're teaching and preaching in the church. And I do preach in the church. I do teach in churches. And so whenever I have that opportunity to bring the two together, I see it as my call.
That's awesome. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So if the way I understand the word religion, in its roots, from the Latin, it means to tie down. Is that correct? To hold down, or to what does that mean? What does religion mean? Because we always talk about religion versus spirituality.
Yeah.
So could you expound upon that?
Yeah, I go back to what I laid out initially, where we can think. There are reasons why people say, I don't have a religion, I have a relationship. Like, and that became all the rage. When I was at,
that means you're a backslider. I have a relationship. God knows my heart.
Yeah. So I received my initial call into what the ministry I am now finding myself in back in the mid-90s in Los Angeles, California, where I'm from. I was a member then of Faithful Central, at the time, Missionary Baptist Church, which would ultimately become Faithful Central Bible Church. And I was being groomed for ministry leadership there. It was under the leadership and still under the leadership of the senior pastor and Bishop Kenneth Ulmer. And during that time, we were all in our 20s, and a lot of folk were speaking in terms of having a relationship as opposed to abiding by religion. Because to your point, religion became this catchphrase for all the things that were wrong about Christianity, right? It was binding, it was keeping you down, and all these things. But what I have later realized is something that Howard Thurman, sage mystic theologian, says about religious experience, especially as it relates to the oppressed. Howard Thurman says that religious experience is dynamic, it's porous, it's yeasty, and it's like a contagion, which I'll come back to in a moment. And he said, but the mind can't handle that. And so what the mind tries to do is bottle up religious experience by trying to construct ideas, dogmas, notions, theologies, and religious positions about experience that is already happening. So when we think about religious dogma, what we realize is it's always a step behind experience that is ongoing. And so what does that religious dogma and theology end up being? What it ends up being is a source of propaganda. It becomes a source, as Howard Thurman puts it, that can control people, that can be used to beat people down. And yet what you end up with is a religious experience that ever progresses and moves. And so the only way that, as he argues, that religious experience in its truest form can be spread, it's not through instruction, not through teaching, but through contagion. And so what we are finding even in this moment, now we've got to be critical and critique this moment and be sure that folk are meaning what they're saying when they're getting out in the street, because it's hot right now. But what we are finding in this moment, different than even say 2016, when Brother Kaepernick started taking a knee, is what we're finding in this moment is the contagion, where folks are realizing the extent to which Black bodies are being cut down unnecessarily, right? And so folks are all over the world, literally all over the world, white folk, Black folk, all over the world. I'm driving around Winston-Salem and I'm seeing more white folk with signs saying Black Lives Matter and white people, have you checked your white privilege, than I've ever seen in my life. Now, that is only spreading by way of contagion. Now, we'll see if it lasts. But the point I'm making is the only way true religion spreads is by way of contagion, not by instruction. And so when I think of religion, brother, in that way, I don't think of it as a thing that holds down. I think of it as the thing that allows us to understand our full weight and measure as we face a world that is absurd, but we understand that there's a God who loves us anyhow.
I want to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. What were you saying, Haywood?
I was like, because I'm putting that in basic terms. It's sort of like, I like saying feet on the ground, head in the clouds.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If I can unpack that further, it's feet on the ground, head in the clouds, but the clouds are so low.
Right.
Our head is not way up in the clouds.
Right.
I believe in a God that is ride or die with me to the extent to which I'm able to call to mind my humanity, because that God is feeding me with a true understanding of who I am. That is what I mean by orientation.
Yes.
And meaning making.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So just a shout out to our viewers. Rashawn, what's up? Woo Woo, Susie, Algiers, doing that work out of Virginia. We see you out there doing that work on these protests. Ruben, Quentin, thank you all. Miko is going ham on here with the comments. Thank you, Miko. Zoom Coleman, thank you for tuning in. I just wanted to talk about like the duality. Like we were talking about people saying like spiritual versus religious, or, oh, I have a relationship with God, God knows my heart, those type of things. Speaking from, I'm just gonna be transparent and I'm gonna speak for myself. I think that it would be the most authentic. For myself personally, you know, I was raised in the church, my parents were ministers. And I do this joke where it's like, oh, you're a child, imagine you're in the church and the preacher's like, oh, you're gonna go to hell. And then as a child, how does that affect you? You know what I'm saying? And like, oh, me reacting, I'm like, oh, well, what am I gonna wear in hell? But that is a joke that I make, but I create that joke. As we know, jokes come out of experience and hurt. That was a hurtful thing to me growing up. And I didn't even know that I was gay, but growing up with just having to live in that space. And also religion has afforded me so many other things. Like it has gotten me through so many circumstances that I probably would not have gotten through without it. But at the same time, it's condemning who I am at my very core. And I've had to live with this duality my entire life. And you know, you can't say that, oh, I'm this, when the very essence of that is against what you are. But you still acknowledge it. I still, to this day, I wake up and ask for forgiveness. Am I asking it for who I am as a person? A lot of that stuff, a lot of, you know, a lot of people that are in my shoes think of religion like that. It's condemning. It's, you know, how can I be in this? And they're criticized when in actuality in the Black church, would it even survive without gay people? It condemns the very people that build its structure. Yeah, so how did that duality, how do people deal with that?
Well, how do people deal with it? It depends on what church you attend.
There you go.
I'll say that.
You're gonna have to come about that Kojic if you want.
Yeah.
You might have to come out that Pentecostal place if you want to find your tribe. All right. I'm sorry, not to that.
Pentecostal.
When this question comes to me, though, Brother Anthony, one of the things that I often go to is John 5:24, where it says, "Truly I say to you that he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has eternal life, and does not come under judgment in this world." Now, what that very small, short verse is saying to me that anything other than belief is not can't be a disqualifier in terms of faith. And so when my same gender loving LGBTQ brothers and sisters come to me and they're asking, yo, is there a place for me in this religious faith, in Christianity? Because what I'm hearing from the pulpit is inconsistent with life-giving narrative about who I am. I say that nothing can derail your connection to the God that you love and the God that loves you. I have a friend who I won't name, but who some years ago sought out prayer from our kind of inner circle of brothers. He said, hey, I'm about to start a series at my church called Our Gay Neighbor. And I called him one-on-one because I said, man, please don't tell me you about to get up there and bash same gender loving individuals, or saying that they have proclivities and they need to be saved back to straight and any of that. He said, no. He said, it's the very opposite. I'm about to do an entire sermon series in a largely evangelical, conservative theological space to say that we have got to stop trying to save gay brothers and sisters straight. Now, he didn't last at that church. I'm not going to say that that's the reason.
Gotta read the room.
Gotta read the room, baby.
You know what? He read the room, and in spite of what he read, he said, I'm going to speak this truth. And that, I believe, changed the narrative for him in terms of how he sees it. So, Brother Anthony, when I hear your words, it is consistent with the words of so many of my dear same gender loving folks in community, where we are allied with each other. I am allied with them. And my point is, it's not just this kind of God loves us all kind of thing, is God uses us in our own likeness. And our orientation is not the stumbling block. It's our ignorance. We could say more about that, but it was largely ignorance of what God is actually doing in the lives of the people who love God.
Patrice,
I definitely had a quick question just in relation to how do you relate to, or how do you teach to the current space that we're in, the current climate that we're in with religion and protesting? Because I, as someone who takes pride in the fact that I got the word in my heart. Listen, I was raised Southern Baptist, okay? I can give it to you from Genesis to Revelation, but there are people who want to say, protesting, as far as whether it's peaceful. Well, I guess what my question is, as far as rioting and looting and parts of it that people would want to call anarchy. How do you speak to that as I guess we're kind of sticking to the Christian religion, or to religious beliefs of everything has to be peaceful, and I totally disagree, just because I know the word, and I just know that sometimes people want to lock in on specific scriptures, especially those about turning the other cheek and things like that, but people like to forget about the fact that God had one of the first protests, if you believe in the Bible, where they was walking around the walls of Jericho, stirring up trouble, and we gonna make this crumble on the Sabbath. You know what I mean? And there's lots of, there are lots of existences, like people are like, oh, pray for your enemies, and lots of people like to pray, the forgive us our trespasses line, where I like to personally go over to Psalm 109, where you start asking God to cut them down and make sure that nobody in their lineage remember them. So I just want to know, where do we fit in with religion and protest and getting justice, for us in this country?
Well, look, religion has been inextricably tied in Black life to the fighting for and gaining of rights, of fighting for justice in whatever form that took. And people like to forget that, or they conveniently forget that while we understand Jesus as a revolutionary, or we understand Jesus within the context of nonviolent social protest, we also have to understand Jesus as a revolutionary that was an actual disruptive force to a regime that wanted folks on the lower rungs of society to shut up, right? And so that's what got Jesus lynched, essentially. And so when I think about, and I get the question a lot in class, you know, was nonviolence the right route to take? I look at nonviolence as promoted by King and Southern Christian Leadership Conference and so many others as a tactic that they chose because they realized that tactically the best route toward the ending of oppressive activity against Black bodies was not to try to fight fire with fire because they had more firepower, but to, in a very real way, shame the nation into understanding that it wasn't abiding by its own creeds, its own values.
Okay, you're saying.
Right? So it was more about tactic. Now, we like to also think of this era as so different than the previous era. Remember, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and SNCC did not agree oftentimes, right? Stokely Carmichael was like, Black power. Nope, I'm gonna keep saying it. Black power. Nope, I'm gonna keep saying it. Black power. And in Mississippi, he and King are walking next to each other, and Stokely was like, Black power. And then the reporter asked King, well, sir, what do you think about this Black power? And he says, I believe in the empowerment of Black people, that Black people need economic and power and power in their communities. And by the end of that march, when they were being, when the protesters were being removed from their own church grounds, their own school grounds, they were being removed. And King was so disheartened by what was happening in that setting, with Stokely Carmichael still near him, he starts saying Black power, right? So we think even of King as this monolithic thinker as it relates to nonviolent social protests, which he was abundantly for, but he was also for the empowerment of Black people to the fullest extent. So when I think about the protests that we see today, of course you're gonna look, folk are upset. Folk are tired of what's happening. I got to check myself because now my language is about to get more colorful. And since more people are on, I need not share the language that we were sharing before all these people was on here. But folk are pissed off. And people have got to understand the nature and the source of what we used to say, that pissivity is not something that has just happened with George Floyd. You know, I've been racially profiled since my 20s. My grandmother has been, I was raised by my grandmother, a Central Louisiana grandmama in Los Angeles, California. And as early as I can remember, I'm talking like 6, 7 years old, she was prepping me before we went to every store, before I even left the house. Pull up your pants. Don't make yourself a target. When we get in the store, don't put your hands in your pocket. Don't you touch anything, right? Because anything that they will see, they will assume that you are a thief, a thug, a problem, and worthy of them coming down on you with a hard fist. So Black folk are sick of that. Black folk are sick of being viewed as animals, criminals, just in how you behold them. Frantz Fanon has this analysis where he talks about this child who says, look, a Negro, right? and what that child is beholding when that child says, look, a Negro is, look at this scary nigga who is about to eat me, mommy, protect me, right? That's just beholding a Black body based upon a preconceived idea that has been folded into the narrative of this person's life through their social location. So their consciousness says that this body is a threat right up front. And so Black folk have been living this. And now some white allies are seeing that Black folk have been living this on a daily basis, that when I leave the comfort of this office, I've got to drive through neighborhoods in my car with my Black bald head and maybe my Dodger cap on. And folk are not looking at me like, oh, the esteemed Dr. Reverend Dr. Hicks. No, they're like, where's that nigga in that car? Right?
The Reverend Doctor.
So,
Reverend Dr. Hicks.
and excuse me for using language for those who I may be offending, but I'm using this language intentionally because this is how Black flesh gets marked in this country, still to this day. And so people are upset about that and they are fighting back and they are intentional about it. Let me be quiet. How much time do we have here?
I know so we're about to get out of here. There was one more thing that someone was saying.
Because we haven't got no Black Jesus yet.
Yeah, I know. So okay,
to do a part 2. We're gonna end up having to do a part 2.
We got a part 2. We gotta do this is a 3-part series right here.
It is a 3-part series, y'all. We gotta come back. So one thing that someone was talking about, like, so you do teach. How do you feel like, so we're in this day and age, I saw this thing where white people, so my mom's family, my great-grandfather presided in the Primitive Baptist Church. So that was in Mount Airy, North Carolina, and state line on the lines of Virginia. You know, they had all these different things, not like a modern church, like they did a lot of feet washing and things of that nature. We saw this thing where these white people were washing Black people's feet, asking for forgiveness for, I guess, 400 plus years of racism and oppression. Now that was a religious ritual that they were using. Now, with you being a professor and a teacher, how do you find that white people receive what you teach them? Is it, can it be unlearned? Is it a thing where they accept it and they're getting it intellectually and they're like, oh, it clicks now? Is that a thing that can happen to whiteness?
It can in some instances. I'm hopeful that it can in more instances. James Cone speaks of this in terms of ontology, right? That Jesus was ontologically Black and that any white person who can really align themselves around the cause of Black lives and see that God seeks justice for Black lives and the thriving and flourishing of Black life, they must not only reject their whiteness, but embrace an ontological Blackness. Now, of course, Albert Cleage would go ahead and say, well, Jesus was a revolutionary Black man anyway. Again, I know we got to come back to that at another time. But I believe the possibilities come. You know, we talk a lot about white folk kind of rejecting their whiteness, but we don't unpack what that actually means. We're not asking white people to hate their flesh. Neither were we saying when we said Black Lives Matter that other lives didn't matter. Some would say we were saying that Black Lives Matter too, or we were just saying Black Lives Matter, period, just like other lives matter. So acknowledge that. And so what our white brothers and sisters have to see is, while they themselves may not have put the noose around a neck and raised that body to choke that body out of life, in a ritual fashion, treating it without sanctuary. While they were not involved with that or even enslaving Black bodies, they are living the benefits of those actions. And if they are in any form, they've got to come to grips with that, even in this so-called post-race, which is a myth, society. And if they can do that, if they can align with the reality of an ontological depth of feeling as it relates to Black life, then maybe they can start doing more than just putting their shoes in their feet in our shoes, but rather seeing the deep pain, trauma, physical, psychological, mental, spiritual pain and trauma, and start to understand what type of work really needs to be done for us to come together. Only then can any of this change.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Final thoughts, Turnipseed?
Yeah. I mean, because we're gonna have to do this again.
We have to. This episode now that we have to have
Happy
a
to
part
do
2
it.
or 3.
I have so many questions that I didn't even get to ask.
Listen.
But Haywood,
Dr. Hicks knows.
how do
Tracie has something.
You know, I grew up in a Catholic church, and the only reason they were able to hold me for so long is because every summer I would go visit my cousins in Savannah. And it was a white church that so I grew up in Montgomery County, Gaithersburg, Maryland. We lived out in North Potomac. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with those areas, but it's like, I don't know, low-key Beverly Hills out there.
Yeah, Beverly Hills 90210 was almost called Potomac, whatever that zip code is.
Potomac, yeah. But because of the old money and the uninteresting people there, I guess they took it out in Beverly Hills. It's a little bit more lavish out there, a little bit more spending. But at the same time, the Catholicism that I lived kind of pushed me further and further away from even wanting to be a part of a mixed community because of the things that you would read in the Bible, and then the way that the kids in the Catholic school that I grew up with would treat you. It became two opposing thought patterns. Well, their actions really aren't saying this. They're calling my skin black as the pavement, throwing out all sorts of racial slurs, not letting their kids go to certain parties when all the kids are invited. And after a while, you start kind of looking around. I sit with my family in the Catholic church, and I look down the aisle, down the pew. There's people standing all along the aisles. And even though we had 8 kids, there was still plenty of room in that pew for other people to sit down, and no one would ever come and sit down. And this is when it started making me question who I am. And I'm like, if this is how God feels, and I don't really think this is the type of God that I want to be around. And I think you have to want to learn. You have to feel, you have to have empathy. You have to feel like there is something that needs to be changed. There's some truth that you're not being told, and you have to be able to go and search that out for yourself. I don't think, just like changing your mind on religion, my father was a deacon. There's a lot that goes into deciding you're not Catholic anymore. It's not just, I'm not Catholic anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and marry my husband. I mean, there's
get your tambourine.
Yeah.
Don't you with Catholicism?
You signed this form for me? No,
it's almost excommunicated.
It's almost like you have to excommunicate yourself. You have to believe. I mean, when I reached the 5th grade and I just got so tired of how I was being treated, we finally got a priest in there. He was nice and young, and he was interesting, and he was telling all sorts of great information so you could actually understand the Bible. And then one day, of course, he made the comment, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And I was like, hold up, I don't even know what this gay is, but it sounds like you're putting down an entire race or group of people. And I'm always down for the underdog. And I'm like, you guys just like this. I can't treat whoever. And this is like in 5th grade, I remember, because I was like, Adam and Steve. I asked my white friend, and she showed me a porno, and I was like, oh, that's what that is.
Oh, she gave you a whole crash course.
It's wild because you have to tell somebody about something in order to tell them that they shouldn't be doing something, and they might not even be aware of it. So this is
you played the scene.
So I say all this to say, people who hold religion, if they really love religion and that's all they see and that's their blind and that's what keeps them kind of grounded into society, hey, that's great for you. But I think there are a whole bunch of people questioning the rituals that are set up within these churches, the attitudes, the whisperings after church. Oh, you know, these people act this way, so we probably shouldn't integrate them as much into our church. And that's kind of how I felt. I felt so strongly disliked by the community. I was like, I want to move to Washington, D.C. That's the closest to the South, where it's just Black people, and I can feel more of myself. So, I mean, I can't believe in stories that were translated 50,000 different ways. There's a whole Vatican of knowledge that they're not sharing with the rest of the world. And you mean to tell me that I'm just supposed to believe this little book this one book that y'all summarized it all in here?
which we know, you know, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Council of Nicaea, right? So you have these people who understand that these books were created and made canon. It's almost like what happened with Star Wars, where they go, okay, this doesn't exist anymore. This does exist now. This is what it is. Yeah. So then you have us in this generation as seekers questioning, which is, I'm glad that we began this way, because we are supposed to ask these questions. You are supposed to question your reality and your faith and all those things. What do you do with that?
So what is it, Tracie, sister?
Yes.
Is that the name? So what Sister Tracie just laid out brilliantly is what I argue has been the function of Black religious inquiry from day one. And I use this term recalibration, that what Black folk were always doing with that one canonized text and seeking other canonized texts, which I'll speak to in a second, is they recalibrated it. Now, what do you do when you recalibrate a machine? You take a machine that is calibrated for a particular function and you tweak it. You make adjustments to it. And when you make those adjustments, the machine still functions in its original intent. But what you do in the adjustments is you expand the function of the machine by recalibrating it. You don't scrap the whole machine. You create new opportunity for the machine to do more expansive work. And that's what Black folk have been doing. They have been recalibrating the Bible, recalibrating Christianity since it was offered to them, telling them that they were destined to be enslaved. James Baldwin gave this wonderful lecture, I think it was later in his life, and it may have been at Berkeley, where he says, as a Black writer, he had to realize that he was born into a language that he had to change, that the very function and assumptions of the language that he was born into were his enemy.
Right.
So he had to really wrestle with the fact that he was Black as sin, Black-hearted, Black as death, Black as, right? All of these negative connotations. He had to wrestle with the end of Shakespeare's Othello, when after he kills his true love, white Desdemona, right? He says to Iago, he says, "I've killed a pearl greater than all my tribe."
Yes.
And Owen is saying, he said, wait, all my tribe?
Oh,
right? So how do we understand, right, in a language that has articulated our understanding of ourselves as adherently, prima facie negative? Well, that's the same thing that Black folk have been dealing with, not only with the concept of Blackness, but also the concept of Christianity and the concept of God that is always given to them in a way that justifies the maltreatment of Black bodies. And Black folk have been recalibrating it for years and years. And I don't think we'll stop doing that.
So y'all, we've run over time. Like there's no, Dr. X, will you please come back?
Yeah. Look, we have not even scratched the surface in terms of gender,
right?
Problematic nature there. Right. So there's a whole lot more work we could be doing. So
women just got in the pulpit. Just got in the pulpit.
We're gonna
So,
go Facebook.
yep.
I got some questions.
I know it's so many people.
No.
Let me tell you, so many people had questions. DeMaro, we didn't get to any of these other questions, but I mean, we were at it for an hour. We apologize.
We're
Teddy,
gonna take notes and we'll bring those questions back. Yeah.
Yeah, so be sure. So y'all tuned in late. Y'all gotta be on time. The stereotypical black person not on time thing. Y'all gotta. The show starts at 8. Y'all want to start asking all these questions at 8:45.
Can we get rid of that stereotype that black people are not on time? Because if my watch looks correctly, I'm still waiting on reparations. So I don't think it's us that have set the standard for not being on time.
I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
From that other universe where time goes backwards. That's CP time.
Clearly, y'all Benjamin Button our time here. We almost at the end of the show. So look, once again, we want to thank our special guest, Dr. Hicks. You are amazing, a well of knowledge that we just had the privilege to drink from. We appreciate you and all your melanated, magical greatness. Congratulations on the new center and all of the powerful black moves that you're making at Wake Forest University. We appreciate you. We send you all the love and light for the things that you've shared here on the show. And now I feel like I'm talking like a preacher. Why do I always? It's like my default. Like, and right now we just want to send you a love offering. Make sure
the doors of the church are now open.
If anybody would like to give them, I just had a word, Shondo. So be sure this is a donation-based show. The Cash App is $Anthony Oaks, and we just divvy it up, just so we can be a blessing to those who have blessed us. Next week we'll be talking about black music. Who knows who we have on here, child? Probably Little Richard. We just go for the hard. I mean, like, just bring him on back, child. He's gonna come back. He'll come back for Black Saint. He'll come back. He love us.
If you haven't found all the folk you want on that show, please email me. I've got a suggestion of a wonderful sister.
Oh, look at connections. Oh, hey, oh, yeah.
I was doing my faith in the black medicine. I'm telling you, Brother Hicks.
I got a quickening.
My faith in the black medicine. I was gone.
Brother, me too.
Shout out to Dr.
When I come to LA, I'm going to see you.
Hunter. Mika, Louisa, thank you all for tuning in. Haywood, Tracie, last words.
Just keep finding information out for yourself. You can believe what you want to believe, and that's fine. And if that's what you want to believe, but if you're looking for more knowledge, I think there's plenty of avenues out there to get that. So you can find me at MJ Herbal Infusions, MJ_Herbal_Infusions on Instagram, or you can also find me at Orange Wellness on Instagram. Both thriving business.
Hey, my name is Haywood Turnipseed Jr. I'm her husband. She makes a lot of money, so I can tell some jokes. We're gonna tell jokes this coming Friday. Check out Anthony's, Patrice's, and myself. A few other comics. We have a 8 o'clock Zoom happening, sponsored by, thanks to the Draft House Comedy Theater. So we bring back Attack of the Comics primetime Zoom fashion, and check us out June 21st. June 20th. June 20th. For our Juneteenth Black Think Tank Revolutionary Comedy Joint. And then you might see me pop up at one of Dr. Hicks's. Do you do any online ministering, sir? Because I'm coming. I'm coming.
Okay.
Not yet.
Bedside Baptist with Dr. Hicks. I can do a bedside Baptist with him. I can,
Dr. Hicks, any final words? Where can people find you?
You know, I've got to do better about that, but they will be able to find me far more sooner rather than later. But my Instagram is HicksDS1, I believe, and I am on Facebook as well. As the center develops, there'll be a whole lot more platforms and opportunities. I don't even know what my Twitter account is, but I'm there. But all I want to do is just say thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to share. Thank each of you for your beautiful spirit. Thank your lovely children who keep coming into the frame. It's all of this has been wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity to further conversation.
And shout out to Pastor Mia. She actually just
Indeed.
popped in. So for the connection, I love you. Thank you so much for the connection. I appreciate it. Patrice.
Just real quickly, it's not so much based on religion. I just want to let any of my Caucasoid allies or friends know that we don't need kente cloth, all right? And we don't need you to wash our feet. We don't want revenge. We just want equality and to be left the hell alone. If that's
And reparations.
And definitely a coin or two. So you can follow me on all social media at But Is She Funny? And you know where I'll be next Tuesday right here in the think tank with Anthony.
So once again, thank everybody for tuning in. Like Patrice said and Haywood, we all will be on Attack of the Comics this Friday. So you can look up Attack of the Comics on Facebook. You just put it in the search bar and it'll pop up and you'll see, boom, there we go. Also on the 20th, it's our post-Juneteenth Comedy Revolution Black Think Tank presents, where we'll have us three and Jamone Darnell, Brittany Carney, and Liz Barlow. It's a free show. We're doing a donation. We're just trying to take some of the stress off you Black people. You know, we got it hard. So we want to provide levity to your lives. So make sure you check that out. You can find me at all things Anthony Oaks Comedian on all social media platforms and my website, anthonyoakscomedian.com. Thanks. We had a lot of people tuned in. Yo, I'm just like so elated. I love you Black people. And shout out to the Flunky. Go check out all their social media platforms. Also, MJ Herbal Infusions, our sponsors. We love them all. We love you all. Patrice,
Yes,
thank you.
love God, love yourself.
Thank
Love
you.
each other.
Blackness, Black Think Tank.
Black
with
Think Tank with
Anthony.
Anthony
Anthony.
and Patrice.
Black Think
Get out of
Tank.
here. Are we off air?
Turnipseed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hicks. I really did it. I really,
Thank you.
really
Yes,
did.
thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
You make me want to
It was
get
wonderful.
baptized again, rededicate my life to
Hey.
Christ.
Yes. Come on,
Watch
you Christ.
You know,
Hey.
breaking it down so matter of factly, and that's making it plain, and that's what I really appreciate. What I
Yeah.
appreciate about the word is when somebody can make it plain. That's one of the things that the Bible says Jesus said to folks. You know, you can't keep the word for the people that was here